How's it, guys? Welcome back to Mike Morton Talks Football. We have an incredible guest, Mike Makaab, super agent, somebody who's been in South African football and coached in South African football, being an agent in the game for many, many years. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time out to chat to me.
Great, Michael, and thank you for inviting me on your show. Been following it with great interest. Well done. It's informative and it just brings football from a different angle, which is nice. So well done.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thank you so much. Yeah, we tried to catch up earlier, but I very wrongfully tried to get in touch with you during the transfer window. Silly of me. Obviously, recognizing the fact that that's your craziest time of the year. How did you find the transfer window this year?
You know, Michael, I'll tell you what I've found, and not only in South Africa but globally, is that the volume of transfers is dropping, and it's really the high end transfers, and I'm talking about throughout the world. It's the high end transfers that have, I believe, buoyed the football market. You know, if you look at Europe, some massive transfers have taken place there. In South Africa, with Mamelodi Sundowns, Chiefs, and Pirates now, I think Pirates and Chiefs are looking to close that gap on Mamelodi Sundowns, and so they've had to go into the market and into the market hard. But I would say overall, the market has become more bearish. It's not as it's not as bullish as it used to be a decade ago. I think there are a number of factors for that. Economies, individuals being affected by COVID and their businesses being affected, and a whole host of things, I believe, has resulted in the market really tempering out a little bit. Will it stay this way? I'm not 100% sure, but it was definitely a different transfer market.
Yeah, obviously, I think a lot of clubs, it looked almost like they were a bit worried about who was going to take over as the head sponsor, and if there was actually going to be one that came in. Betway obviously came in quite late, but then there were
Correct.
some clubs that I think almost like they had like an inside track on that news. If I look at the way that John Committees and Cape Town City were signing, they definitely weren't shy in the transfer market this year. So, I mean, yeah, what were some of the big deals that you guys were involved in at Pro Sport?
The renewal of Mangoba Viti's contract at Sundowns, something that surprised many people, Kobamela Kodisang's return to South African football and Mamelodi Sundowns when he was really doing very well at Moreirense. Played the majority of the games, mainly as a starter, but as a starter and a sub, I think he played something like 30 odd games in the league. So it was a little bit of a surprising one. And we can touch base as to why I think it happened a little later. And then Chandra Campbell, he's moved to Club Bruges, actually Club Next, which is their next generation club, or let's say effectively their reserve team. So that was a big one. And I must say, Chandra's rise to that level has been quite remarkable. And then Nico Moby, Bafana right back to Supersport United, a few other significant deals. But, and I was saying to the guys the other day, if I go back probably 4 or 5 years, Michael, we would average around 35 to 40 deals in the main transfer window, the July, August,
Yeah.
which is, it's a lot of deals. I would think that we probably did less than half of that this time around. So there's a significant change in the way the market is operating these days. A lot of clubs look for loans, and it's strange. They're even prepared to take loans without an option to purchase. So, I just think, again, it's basically the economical situation within football, that it's the economy that I believe is driving these sort of things to happen. And you see it happen all over the world, where clubs are quite happy to loan players without having an option to take them on a permanent transfer.
Yeah. You guys rep Basadien, if I'm correct.
No,
No.
we used to
No, not
represent,
anymore. Okay. Okay. I thought you
but
still
there
had
was
it.
one that I thought
Yeah.
didn't quite happen.
Yeah.
I thought Jaden Adams might happen. That didn't happen. But there again, Stellies year in and year out have produced incredible players, and their superstars are bought on a regular basis. So, when you look at how they've been able to compete against the best in the business in this country, off the back of selling their so-called top players each and every single season, it's a remarkable effort from everybody involved there. They've got the formula right.
Yeah, Mark, what do you think it is? I mean, I speak quite a lot about them. I hear a lot about their data analytics and the way that they're really analyzing transfers, and it just feels like they're playing chess while a lot of other guys are playing checkers. Looks like they've
Yeah.
got everything planned a couple moves ahead. When they bring one in, when they sell one, they've already got three players ready to come in. Yeah, I mean, do you have any insight into sort of the behind the scenes operations there at Stellies?
Well, we're fortunate enough to represent Brendan Fourie, who is head of recruitment and head of their analytics. And I think the world has changed, Michael, in terms of how players are scouted. The internet, technology, algorithms, these are words that are pretty alien to me as a person that's been in the industry as an agent for almost the last 3 decades. So May 98 is when I started. But the world is trending towards that. There is no doubt about it. Very, very few players will go on trial to, let's focus on Europe, will go on trial to Europe unless their stats and analytics back what the potential club that wants to purchase them sees as being the sort of benchmark for a particular position. So you're 100% right when you say Stellenbosch has gone the way of putting a lot of emphasis on analytics, on stats, and let's talk purely recruitment because they do it in every single aspect of the way they run the football club. And I don't think they're the only ones, but that is without a doubt the way to go. Because gone are the days where you pick up the phone as a football agent and say, I'm looking after a talented young central midfielder, Michael Morton. These are his attributes. I can send you some video footage of him. Tell me what you think. Those days are gone. We belong to a site called Transfer Room. I'm sure you've heard about Transfer Room.
Yeah,
We,
I
we
just see Stellenbosch did a deal with them now recently.
we've been on Transfer Room for 3 years, and it's total of 80 agents. It's almost like you've got to put your profile and CV forward, and you accept it or you're not accepted. And I think about 800 football clubs, so it's almost 10 clubs to each agent in terms of the allocation. And there again, it's almost a dating site for football, where you have direct contact with the sporting directors and the decision makers on the technical side of the team or of the various clubs. So I think Steadies have moved ahead with the times, and I think they might even be a step or two ahead of the opposition when it comes to their data analysis. And it's clear to see that when they make signings, it's almost as if, without exception, the footballer fits into what they're trying to achieve or into the system almost seamlessly, which is very important.
Yeah. Mark, I want to take this conversation a bit in the direction of actually the agency business in general.
Yes,
I think you're probably the most highly qualified person to speak on this topic. But just to start it off, what do you believe are the main responsibilities of a football agent in South Africa?
I think the word agent is misleading because, when you talk about an agent is somebody that represents a party in a negotiation. But for example, if I buy a home, an estate agent may do the deal, but that estate agent doesn't phone me every month or two to find out if I'm enjoying the home. Once the deal is done, the deal is done, and that's it. And that's why I think when you denote a word like agent to our business, it's misleading. Rather than call us deal brokers. In terms of the agency business, I believe the agent should have the ability for overall career guidance, planning. If I were talking to you, I would say, Michael, you've expressed an interest to join the agency, and I need to know what your dreams are. I need to know where you want to be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, post football, because it's important that every decision we make together, and you'll be the most influential person as the footballer, but every decision that we make together has to be with that end goal in sight. And of course, we might have to be flexible enough to alter the course because things aren't perfect and things don't happen in a straight line most of the time. But I do think that career guidance is vital. and a holistic approach to it, not only from a footballing side, but from generally from the well-being of the footballer, in terms of his finance, admin, assistance in first-time buying of homes, all of those sort of things. I believe if you can offer those services, you're not an expert in everything, so you've got to bring in experts from the various fields. But if you can offer those services to a footballer, to allow the footballer to focus on one thing and one thing alone, and that's on playing the game, then I think that's the perfect role of a football agent.
Yeah. And then how would you say then would you balance the sort of the interests, or rather the balance providing a good service to a player and then running a good business, if you had to say? Because obviously in South Africa the reality is, I mean, not everyone is earning 200,000 Rand a month. There's some
No,
guys that are earning a lot less than that. So in terms of taking agents' commissions and everything like that, you, at the end of the day, you want to run a good business as well. So how do you balance that, like having enough players to have a very successful business versus being able to provide a good service by not having that many players?
I think it all boils down to why we do things in life. I'll ask you a question and say, and I've already off air said to you, I think you're doing an incredible job on your show. But it's because you're driven by a certain reason. There's a why in what you're doing, and it's exactly the same as on our side. It may sound very pure, too pure to be true, but the truth is, if I can make a difference to somebody's life, significant difference to that person's life, that's where I get my major satisfaction. We're a commercial business. Obviously, we have to earn, otherwise we can't provide the service. But I don't think that what you're earning should ever be more important than the process of assisting a footballer to achieve full potential, or that footballer's maximum potential. And so that's how I believe you balance it out. You also cannot over promise, because often, and I'm not having a go at any particular person, but in our industry, there is often promises made that are not fulfilled. And we probably all guilty of it, but we try and limit that to the absolute bare minimum, so that when I sit with a footballer and we discuss that footballer's career, I'm not going to say things to that footballer to ensure that he signs with me. And I'm using he, could be she. He signs with me or stays with me. I've said this to so many players. I'll tell you what I truly believe is the right move. But at the end of it all, you've got to be the person that buys in, because I'm not playing the game. You're playing the game. So I think it's about striking that balance between the human touch and compassion and being in business. And if you can balance that without one overweighing the other too drastically, I think you'll find the agency industry quite successful if you can do that.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure most agents would prefer the scenario where maybe they manage Cristiano Ronaldo like George Mendes, and you got like 10 top players that are earning millions and millions of pounds, and then you only have 10 people to worry about, but you can provide an incredible service because only 10 people. But in South Africa, that's not the reality. Obviously, we've got to you've got to maybe have a bigger book of players in order to run a successful agency. It's just, that's why I asked, like, how do you balance like the volume versus the service?
Again, it will depend on the number of people we have on the ground. So without mentioning names, we have 5 people on the ground in South Africa that deal directly with players on a day-to-day basis. I do as well. So I'm the 6th. Mike Jr. runs our global division. So we've got him and another in Europe. So in total, we've got 7 people on the ground, and then a whole host of associates on the continent in the African context. But Michael, it's such a valid point, because you've got to make sure, just like everything else, that you don't take on so many clients that you can't give them the service that you portray to give as an entity. And so that really should be the governing factor.
Yeah. Then the other thing, Mike, when it comes to agents, and I don't know if this remains true, but I've always felt almost, if you have a business and you've got 16 clubs that basically are always there, and you deal with them on a day-to-day basis, and then you've got your footballers that are obviously, a new footballer comes every second day. There's a new footballer, new young talent. Like, how do you as an agent then balance protecting your relationship with the clubs versus really looking after your player? Because I've seen in many occasions where it'll probably be better for the agent to protect their relationship with a club that they know they're going to have to deal with for the next 10, 20 years, and rather not look after their player correctly. When in terms of a business, you'd probably be better off protecting your relationship with a club than looking after your player correctly. I don't know how you feel about that, Mike, and how do you deal with that conflict?
Michael, again, such an incredibly valid question, because can you imagine if, as an agent, you have no relationship with clubs? At the end of the day, who employs the club?
Yeah,
So you've,
no one wants to take your players.
but I think it all boils down to having a professional relationship with football clubs and a professional relationship with your clients. At the end of it all, if a football club becomes annoyed with us because we're doing our job properly, then so be it. Then so be it. We have to accept that we cannot please everybody. On the other hand, if a footballer believes that they can do what they please, and we will protect them in light of what they've done, and it ruins our relationship with those that are employing the footballers, then we've got those decisions to make. We will always try and find the truth, and be guided by the truth. If we believe a club is not treating a player fairly, we will approach that club in that fashion, and we will then demand fair treatment. Exactly the
Yeah,
same thing.
because I put myself in your shoes, and I think to myself, like, well, you've got, can I really go to war for this player here over this issue when I know I've got to do another deal with this club in 6 months that could be maybe more lucrative or whatever, and then do I burn this bridge? Because this, we've seen in many occasions where clubs have now refused to do dealings with certain agents because of a certain other deal that has gone wrong or whatever. Like, I just think like it must be a very difficult balance to try to find
It is.
with really, yeah.
It's difficult, but I also have to say the following to you. If I had no relationship with a football club because of a certain stance that I took related to unfair treatment, in my opinion, of the footballer and the footballer's opinion, and sometimes it's clear cut. If a player isn't paid, you cannot make excuses for a football club unless there's a valid reason for the player not being paid. Then you've got to fight tooth and nail to ensure that justice prevails. But I'm going to say this to you because it's the truth. Irrespective of whether a football club likes an agent or not, if I'm professional in what I do, if I try and conclude deals that are fair across the board to all parties, both parties, the player and the football, and it can never be perfect, but you've got to try and get that equilibrium as close as possible to being balanced. And that football club still is annoyed and doesn't want to deal with me. If I bring Lionel Messi into their office,
Exactly.
they're not going to look at me and say, sorry, we're not dealing with you. You can take Messi elsewhere. It's a fact of life. And club bosses that are mature, and there are a number of club bosses in SA that are very mature when it comes to issues like this. We'll have our disagreements, and at times there'll be heated disagreements. But once that disagreement is done and dusted, and it's been resolved in whichever way, the mature club owner, the mature football agent will always do business going forward. It's just sad that there are instances on both sides of the coin where agents are not ethical and professional in the way they deal, and clubs are not ethical and professional in the way they deal. And by the way, and players at times not ethical and professional in the way they deal. So it's again, it's human nature. When you're dealing in an industry where it's ultimately the RP is human, then you're always going to have these difficulties and challenges that will present themselves. It's again how you deal with them, and through experience, you more or less understand what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah. Mike, just for the general audience and maybe for young footballers coming up, can you explain to them how the agent's commission works and what an agent's actually allowed to charge a footballer and sort of the contractual stuff that's related to to getting an agent, maybe it's a young footballer coming up for the first time and doesn't have any idea about what an agent's actually entitled to with regards to a footballer?
Okay, so let's talk about FIFA's rules and regulations. FIFA are very specific, have become even more specific with what football agents can charge and how they can charge it. Okay, how they can charge their fees. It depends on the value of the contract. Once you get above a certain threshold, the percentage reduces, and there is a maximum percentage that is stipulated in your rules and regulations pertaining to football agents and what they can charge. There's also a mechanism whereby, with the permission of the player and the football club, the club can pay the commission on behalf of the player. And again, it depends on the value of the contract. There could be a split where the club pays half and the player pays half. So it's all stipulated within FIFA's ambit. When you sign a representation agreement as a licensed agent with a player, it's more or less a standard agreement. A few clauses, you can adjust here and there, but it's a standard agreement, and certain clauses by law have to be inserted. I don't have to tell you, for example, the one definitive clause deals with the length of time that you can sign a contract as a representative of a football player, and that's 2 years maximum. And you cannot have a clause in there which automatically gives you the right or an option to extend. It's got to be done all over again with the player. So I'm going to use Siyabonga Nomveti as an example. Bele has been with me since he was 19 years old. We still do a lot of work for him on his foundation, and he's a brand ambassador for a few brands that we've matched him with. But every 2 years, I had to get Siyabonga in to sign a new contract. So that was almost like 15, 16 contracts that we signed. Players have protection, provided they are aware of what the rules and regulations state. The rules and regulations can vary from country to country, from a football association to football association, provided the core of FIFA's rules and regulations are not violated. So it very much depends on the labor law country, the association's rules and regulations, which, by the way, have to be lodged with FIFA for approval, and all of these sort of things. So there are definite mechanisms in agreements to protect the rights of players.
Yeah. Just for transparency, I mean, obviously you brokered my deal with Amazulu a couple of years ago now, and you did your commission structure directly with the club, and I said to you, this is what I wanted to earn. You said, cool, no problem, Mike, and you went off and you did it, and then you obviously took your commission on top of the deal. Is that how you structure most of your deals, or are there any times where you maybe sign a 10% commission with your players? How do you prefer to do your dealings with your players?
We don't have, in South Africa, we don't have one footballer that pays us directly, unless it's a deal we've pre-agreed with that footballer because the club doesn't want to pay. Okay. But one thing I can tell you, which I hold in very serious light, and agents should never be allowed to do this, is double dipping. So
that was my very next question.
Yeah, no, it should never be allowed. And by the way, there should be total transparency.
Can you just break that down, Mike? Can you explain what that is for the audience?
Yes. Let's say, for example, so the rules have changed quite drastically. You can earn money from both the footballer you represent and the engaging club, but you cannot earn money from the selling club and the footballer in any deal, and you cannot earn money from the selling club and the purchasing club. So the only time that you are, with today's rules and regulations, allowed to earn from both sides is if you engage with a football club on behalf of your player. But again, there's still limits to the percentages you can charge. So let me give you an example. Let's say I do a big deal, and it's above 200,000 US dollars in terms of the player's wages. The maximum allowable percentage there, according to FIFA's new rules and regulations, which, by the way, is still being hotly contested worldwide, is 6%. 3% from the player, 3% from the engaging club, or 6% directly from the player, or 6% directly from the engaging club. Below $200,000, it's 10%. So if I negotiate a deal on your behalf with a football club, you should be 100% aware of the commission I am charging the football club. That's the transparency that I believe has to exist in football. Otherwise, how do you know what I'm earning? If you say to me, I'm happy with X amount, if you're happy with X amount and I can get you X plus 50%,
Yeah.
I should only
You
take my
can't take the
percentage.
50%.
So that's where I believe, and I hope it doesn't happen often, but that's where I believe agents are wrong if the player is not aware of what they're earning and they earn more than the percentage that is allowable according to the rules and regulations of FIFA.
Mark,
So
you have obviously.
just to put, sorry, Mike, just to add to that, not one player pays us commission.
Yeah. Yeah,
Not
I
one.
prefer that structure personally because
Of
I've
course.
obviously been burnt in the past. You are aware of my history with
Yeah.
agents. So, yeah, I mean, I've been burnt in the past. So, that is some advice I would give to players is to rather, I prefer that structure where the agent takes their deal, their cut from the club and they do their commission that way. Like,
And make sure as a
just more
player,
transparent.
you say to the club, I'd like to know what my agent is earning.
Yeah,
Transparency is
100%.
vital. In any relationship, transparency is vital. So why should it be any different between a football agent and his or her client?
Yeah, and if they don't want to disclose that, then that's a big, big red flag.
It's a red flag. Of course it is.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Yeah, Mike, you have obviously your finger on the pulse of the market at large. When you're looking at European clubs, the smaller European leagues versus say our big three in South Africa, in terms of salaries and stuff like that, are our big three like out punching these guys in the smaller leagues in Europe? I mean, what is the reason that we're not getting a lot of our guys into the smaller leagues in Europe as a sort of a stepping stone? And most of the guys are preferring to stay here. Is it a financial thing?
Well, let me answer that question maybe in a few parts. To start with, and to answer your first question about do the top spenders, the top football clubs in this country, pay their top players more than those players can earn in small clubs in Europe? Most definitely. Most definitely. And when we say small clubs in Europe, don't exclude your mid-tier clubs in the smaller leagues. So if you go to the top five in the world, top five leagues, England, Spain, Italy, Germany, and France, invariably, the clubs there, because of the exchange rate as well, invariably the clubs there will pay more than the top clubs here in South Africa. However, don't forget, if you're earning euros, you're living in a country where you're paying euros. You're not earning euros and spending rands. So that's got to be taken into account. I'm of the belief that the reason why we're not sending more players into Europe is because there's a number of reasons. Number one, we're competing with the rest of the world. We're competing with the rest of Africa. We've just placed 4 or 5 top young African players from Ivory Coast, Senegal, Zambia, Mali into Europe. One of which is Ousmane Diamande, plays for Sporting Lisbon now. He's 20 years old. Ousmane went from the third division, the Ivory Coast, to an under-20 team, Midtjylland in Denmark, for 6 months, loaned to Mafra in the Portuguese second division for 6 months, and then straight to Sporting as a starter. And has become a champion in Portugal with Sporting, has become a champion with the Ivory Coast and the AFCON. But the difference is that the asking price for Ousmane Diamande is a lot less than the asking price from our clubs in this country for its top young players. So you're competing. And again, analytics. You're the sporting director of a football club in Europe. You look at 2 players, you look at their stats are pretty similar. You look at their potential upside. You say, well, this kid is from Brazil, that kid is from South Africa. Potential upside in terms of success, and we can only work on, again, analysis and stats. The Brazilian probably has a greater chance of success of getting to the top of the ladder than the South African kid. Why should we be paying 4 times for the South African kid what we're paying for the Brazilian kid? No, it just doesn't make sense. The risk and reward doesn't make sense. So we rather go with a Brazilian. So there's a whole host of factors. Plus, we have a lovely country. We live in a beautiful country. You must understand that, for example, in Brazil, the majority of their top players came from, and I still think a lot come from, the favelas, the slums in Brazil, where it's their only outlet to a better life. Whereas I believe we live in the best country in the world. And, at times it's a choice of, do I want to play for one of the big teams here and earn a great salary, comfortable in my environment, comfortable around my colleagues and my peers, or do I have a bigger dream than that? Ultimately, to start off playing in a smaller league in Europe, but with the upward potential of ending up playing in a big league. And I guess, that's a topic you and I could sit and discuss for hours as to why South African players haven't been more successful in recent times as they were many years ago.
Yeah, because I always just look at it as like if our best players don't go, then it basically holds that the next player can't make the move, because it's like, if say you have Ronwen Williams, the best goalkeeper at Sundowns, if he doesn't ever jump to Europe, then
Yeah,
the second choice at Sundowns never gets exposed to playing professional football, and that second choice could maybe go in and do a great job. And it's like, if we don't get our guys moving out of South Africa, then it just limits the amount of professional footballers we're creating in South Africa. And I think that's where Brazil's so strong, is that they just have this conveyor belt, because then they just go through the Brazilian system, off into Europe, off into Asia, off into whatever. And then they've got a database of, like, I don't know, tens of thousands of professional footballers all over the world, whereas South Africa is very much concentrated in South Africa.
I agree. And it's something that I think will change. I think our result in the recent AFCON, where we finished third, got the world to sit up and take notice again of South African footballers. The fact that we're really doing well under Hugo Bruce, irrespective of controversy, we're really doing well under Hugo Bruce. We have a great group of young players in this country, talented young players in this country. So I think it is going to change, Michael. I think we'll get back to the days where players from this country are sought after, and that football clubs will look at doing deals where they retain a bigger percentage in the future sell-on of the player, maybe in two sell-ons as part of the deal, where they can really then reap the benefits, because the big deals are done once a player is in Europe, settles, does well. They know that he can settle out of his home country in that particular environment, in a European environment, and that's where the value of a player really escalates. So I think somehow the mentality of South African football clubs has to change somewhat, and look at, if you believe in a young player, look at keeping your investment in that young player for a longer period of time, as opposed to wanting to earn the majority of the money up front.
Yeah, there's a lot of positive signs. I mean, we've done a few deals into North Africa now out of South Africa, which, I
Correct?
mean, that's something that's come over the last 2-3 years. I think obviously Pitso opened that door, Mad Al Ahly, and
Correct.
now it looks like there's Tunisian clubs starting to look in South Africa. I mean, I think that's wonderful signs that, and obviously Sundown's success on the continent as well is now sort of, there's a lot of North African clubs that are starting to sniff around South African footballers. I mean, have you dealt at all with this, with that market? How, like, I have very little knowledge of the North African football market and what sort of,
Yes,
yeah, I mean,
we have, but it's a different market. It's a totally different market. The clubs are completely different in the way they think and trade. So it's a market that there's a place for top South African players in North Africa. But for me, it would rather be more mature players, like the Ellis Makwana deal that just happened now, more mature players as opposed to the youngsters. Because I believe if you're a young player and you've got the upward potential, Europe has to be your destination.
yeah, no, 100%. But yeah, I mean, the guys are earning good money there. I think, as far as I'm aware,
Oh,
it's dollar denominated, a lot of the contracts there in North Africa. So the guys are
correct.
doing very well financially. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Mark, and I don't know how much time we still have, but I think there's one question that a lot of people ask a lot, is the salary disparities in South Africa. Because when
Yes.
we speak about the top clubs in the country, we've obviously got the big three and a couple other clubs that pay good salaries, but then we have some other guys at the bottom end of the thing. What's the kind of spectrum that you're
Oh,
seeing in terms of the top end and then the bottom end? I know it's a very broad question to answer, but I mean,
I
what's
can
the top ends and sort of the lower ends you're seeing?
I can answer it in I think the most simplistic way, that your top earners in this country will earn. So let me be careful how I answer this, but 40 times what your bottom earner earns. That's the disparity
Yeah, that's
on an
crazy.
average.
Yeah. Phew.
taking the
So
top echelon.
what if you had to say the average salary in South Africa, taking all that into consideration, what is the average PSL salary in South Africa?
Very difficult to
Yeah.
answer that, but I would say somewhere between, on an average, 800 to a million a year. But it's
Wow.
extremely hard to answer that.
Yeah, I think the top boys blow that completely out of proportion.
They do. They do.
Yeah. So if you had to take Sundowns, Pirates, Chiefs out of the equation, what would a general PSL player, someone who has a decent career, 25 years old, going into a decent football club, what's the kind of average salary that you're looking at there?
Michael, again, it very much depends on
Yeah, it's great.
you know,
Yeah, it's hard to put your. It's not like rugby or cricket where there's like
no,
bands
no,
or there's
but
yeah,
you can probably look at somewhere between 6 to 800,000 a year.
yeah,
But that's so broad. That is so broad, and
yeah,
it varies from club to club, varies from player to player. Positions are crucial as well. I don't have to tell you, there's an absolute shortage of top strikers in the country. So when there is a top striker, the demand for that striker pushes the price through the roof, and the player's personal terms can also be negotiated upwards because of the demand. It's all again about the demand for players in certain positions, and age is important, injury record is important. There's a whole host of things that will put a
yeah.
value on a player.
Yeah, it goes back to the old saying, like you are whatever somebody's wants to pay for you at
Exactly.
the end of the day. Yeah, Mike, geez, I feel like I've got about 1,000 more questions here, but I know that you have to run. So, sure,
We can always do
I'd love to set up another. Oh, no, we could do part two, part three, part four. But Mike, thank you so much for the time. I think quickly before you go, I just want to ask you one
yeah,
more because I know that he is your client. The news of Ndah's injury.
yes.
I heard today that he's broke his leg. I think
He had a
is that
fracture.
correct?
Yeah, he had a fracture.
Wow.
So he's already had the operation, very successful, and not as serious as everybody thought it might be. We're hoping. I
Okay.
don't know what the official timeline is, but I'm hoping by the end of the year, Olisa will be back and ready to play again.
Amazing. So you won't miss the AFCON or anything like that.
Well, the difficult part of that is the fact that, without club football under your belt, it's very difficult for any national team to select a
Yeah.
player. It's a pity because he was just starting to get back to the Olisa and Ndah that we know he can be. But these are things that happen in football, and you've got to take them on the chin and move forward as a player.
Yeah. Because again, I mean, obviously, I mean, Orlando Pirates, massive club and a great place to play your football.
Yeah.
But I was looking at him and thinking like he wasn't going to be in South Africa for much longer.
No.
When I've played against him and looked at him, I'm thinking this is a guy that's Europe bound, or that he has everything that you look at. He's got a big stature. He can pass the ball. He's a Rolls Royce of centre backs. I really like him. So I was thinking that he wasn't going to be in South Africa for much longer.
Michael, you're spot on. In actual fact, before he got injured last term, we had a number of clubs in the MLS and in Europe after his services, and exactly the same now, particularly as he was called up into the Nigerian national team. That obviously raises eyebrows even more. But again, one has to accept these things happen in sport. He's a tough young man. He's not old. I still think that Olisa's time will come. It'll happen at the right time for him.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for all the info and the time. I really, really appreciate it. And there's definitely going to be many more parts to this. I think I got so much more to ask you, but thank you so much for your time.
Michael, thank you very much, and for your show. Again, well done. I watch it regularly, and I just think that you're doing a fantastic job for football. Well done.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for all your input and help over the years as well.
Absolute pleasure.